My name's Euean Clark. When I was at school, there were two subjects that I loved at school. One of them was history, the other was science. I love history simply because of the beautiful, colourful books the way they sort of like displayed history to children. It was very, very colourful because they wanted you to get into it. Practically all of that history was Eurocentric. The only part where I ever found anything about myself or people that looked like me was that tiny little bit of history that he called slavery, basically. I also like science. I love science. And years later, it sort of like came together that I'm now mad into quantum mechanics.
Quantum physics.
Quantum physics and quantum mechanics. And the way that quantum mechanics quantum physics is actually affecting history. Because the quantum physicists are beginning to discover things about the world that
ancient people talked about a long time ago.
Yeah, very,
so-called primitive peoples.
Quantum mechanics, quantum physics basically talk about our existence, about the things that we as African people, black people on the planet discovered years before people like Einstein and all those sort of stuff. So that's how it came together for me. But the thing with history is that I've always been very vocal about the things that I know about history. And being a black person working in white organizations, I'd be like talking to some of my white co-workers and I'll be saying things like, oh, do you know such and such a thing? And they'd say, no, that's not true. What are you talking about? And I'd be like, hang on, how come these people don't know this? And it slowly dawned on me that the majority of European people don't actually know their true history because they weren't actually taught it. They were only taught what certain people at the top wanted them to know. Basically, history is a form of controlling, really.
Yeah, controlling concepts by which to think by.
Yeah, and so my quest now is basically to try and change people's concept of history and sort of like get the truth to come out, basically. So that's one of the reasons I got involved with this revealing history thing with the museum. Museums are important because they're like a focal point of sort of like historical knowledge.
Oh, yes,
and you go into most museums in the country today, and they're disseminating Eurocentric knowledge. So I'm trying to change that by getting them to include the history of
other people,
non-European people.
And it's usually the objects of the got in the museums where they actually come from. Yeah. You'll find.
And I believe that if you include the history of non-white people in museums, you will actually get more people going into museums. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we're not talking about the control of the information, i.e. the people owning those museums who will tend to be ethnically white, then controlling what is said about those objects or things. What we're saying is bringing other people on board from communities to take part in this. However, what you find is there'll generally be what you call interpretations. The museum management or staff will tend to dictate how the information from other cultures is then put across, i.e. controlled. And what we find from our experience and what we're finding from this revealing histories, especially from 3 so far, the last one being here, Science Museum, which is actually doing the better of the 2 previous ones we've had experience of, is that there's been behind the scenes actual dictation of what forms of revealing history is taken on board. It's being dictated about how that story is going to be told. And we're talking about which would be classified as what I call white pretentious middle class version of the black thing. So we'll put it forward, but they'll then interpret it and say, well, this is how it's going to be displayed. Even though they've asked for another cultural interpretation, yet dictate how it's then going to be put across. So that is one of the, I suppose, weaknesses of the revealing histories. Yeah, it's got its positives in that it's suddenly, right, they're bringing it forward. They're saying, let's look at a black part of history. But we're saying, but excuse me, black people are a lot more than just enslavement. And why suddenly all this money and all of this? So this part of our history, when in fact, we were around the planet from when human beings walked out of Africa till we peopled the rest of the planet. So why just this little bit? So is that saying suddenly we exist only in this period of time and space? what about all the others? Because people get misinterpreted because they haven't got the other histories, so they'll think, oh, is that it? Because that's all we're getting, and that's what's all being given, is how their museums build up on this to help expand human beings, children's minds, black, white, Asian, Chinese. How is this now going to be used, this revealing histories? How is it going to be used to expand human minds, humans' feelings, the way we think about the world? How? Is it just going to be a frozen point?
One of the things we're also trying to do is to try and get this information sort of like installed permanently. Because what tends to happen is that every October when we have Black History Month, our phones start going mad. Everybody wants us to come and give talk on Black History. And I'm actually saying that Black History doesn't just happen in October. The things I do when I'm telling Black History is I always start with Irish history and explain how the situation that happened in Ireland sort of like preceded what happened in Africa. Because this notion of colonialism was actually practiced on the Irish
yeah, the first
before they used it on us, basically, you know. And it saddens me that Irish history isn't being taught in school, and I would like to see that happen, and then we can sort of like see the wider picture of, you know, where that sort of like that mindset comes from, basically, that's basically running the world now in a way.
Yeah, and it's abusive to all people.
Yeah.
All who are not within that particular power. So the structure of the way of thought abuses humans. Yeah? Not necessarily those humans with the power and with the economics, but the vast majority of humans. So for example, if we say, well, 1/10 of the planet is Western European, yet that 1/10 of the planet dominate 90% of the Earth's resources.
Yeah.
We just bottom line. 1/10 white Western of the planet. 90% of the planet is what? Of colour. Well, where's all the resources and materials coming from? Feeding what part of the population? Yeah. That's the basics. Yeah. And how do we get people to start to see that and say, something's not right here, and how are we going to improve it? But unless we look at the truth honestly, how are we going to get a proper solution?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at England basically is just an island in the Pacific. And yet England controls what? 90% of the world's wealth. I mean, if you look at the City of London, the City of London is the richest square mile on the planet. How did that come about? We need to look at that, and I think all the answers to that is hidden in history. And so one of my thing really is to try and get it out of history and get it out to people so that people understand what's going on. That's basically one of my quests, really. Yeah.
And we're hoping that with revealing histories, which the museums are doing, starts to be less class, less intellectually orientated, and becomes more open for everybody. Yeah. So that people on the estate in Euean, in Wivenshaw, in Miles Platting, Harper A, say, yo, we've got an inclusion in there, we're going to come and hang out there, we're going to go there today. Yeah. Instead of seeing it as something, nothing belonging to you, you ain't going to go nowhere near that joint. Yeah. You don't want that. How can you get communities from to come in? And unless you include, that ain't going to happen.
One of the things that I found out is that a lot of the information that we need to get out to people is actually written in a very academic form. Yeah.
So that, again, exclusive.
And so my role really that I've sort of like assigned myself is to get hold of these academic books and read them, and then sort of like decipher them and then deliver it to people in a sort of like in a plain way, that, you know, so that people can understand them. Because I've been to conferences where academics have, you know, stood on the podium and tried to talk to people, and because they're talking in a sort of like lofty academic fashion, all the information just goes over your head, really, and you don't get it. And so I realised that there was a problem there. So one of my role really is to get it and sort of like simplify it and decipher it and then pass it down.